I think the read that they would have is that America is not in this for the long run. Doesn't have the staying power to stick things up. If you fight, if you engage, whether in a physical conflict or war of attrition around ideas, the Americans are likely to blink first, to break first.
Is the United States declining as a global superpower? Well, CRA Director Frans Cronje recently returned from a month-long trip in the United States. Frans Cronje, welcome back to South Africa and to the CRA channel. Could you tell our viewers what were some of your impressions from your recent trip to the US?
Yeah, David, hi. Yeah, big society, America. So, it's difficult to get a handle on it. But we've been going to America for almost 2 decades, and talking about South Africa and the world, and the institute that I'm a bigger part of has a deep history in the United States as well, and we're very fond of the United States. And it was an interesting trip, David. I was there in America for the 9/11 attacks, so I saw that happen and saw the response. And it was, in a sense, a bookend of history to be there now again for the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And if there's one impression that's formed in the mind of this observer, which is all that it is a very different society to that of 20 years ago in the sense of its confidence about its place in the world, its confidence about its leadership in the world, its confidence about the ideas and the principles upon which America was founded. And if there's one single takeout of and we observe very keenly, talk to a lot of people, it's that the confidence is somewhat shaken on a global stage.
Enjoying this analysis? Click here to sign up for our 30-day free trial for more content from the CIA.
Frans, it seems to me that at the political level, in terms of US politics, there's something of an interregnum at the moment, that Biden has been shown to be quite weak. His likely successor in the White House is Kamala Harris, who is not widely loved. What do you make of domestic politics in the US at the moment?
Well, my impression, again, is deep divisions exist within both parties. Within the more conservative Republican establishment, I think there is concern about the role that might in future be played by former President Trump. Can he be a kingmaker? Does he run again? Does that split the Republican vote? Democrats, I think, in a similar position, concerns about the ability of Mr. Biden to do his job and how long-term a prospect he is, and doubts about the capacity of the Vice President, Kamala Harris, to step into those shoes, and what conflict may lie ahead in that party. If it, even in 4 years' time, if Mr. Biden doesn't run again, if it needs to pick a candidate who is not Harris, the kind of conflict that might then ensue between its more left-wing, radical factions and the more middle-of-the-road Democratic establishment. So both in a similar position. They've got radical factions. There are leaders that draw those radical factions, and both parties, I think, see those as a liability of sorts. So while there's uncertainty, I think, my impression about America's place in the world, and that's held within the United States, that's underpinned to a certain extent by a great degree of uncertainty about the future trajectory of both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party.
And in terms of foreign policy, do you think that the United States is tilting more towards isolationism and away from interventionism?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that applies across the board politically in America. I remember the Afghanistan withdrawal went badly, but it was set up. I mean, the idea of it very much by the Trump administration. It was one of the Trump policies that was later kept by Biden. He reversed many others, but the exit from Afghanistan was one that was retained. And I think if you consider how America's major ideological adversaries would respond to that, whether you're talking about the Iranians or the Russians or the Chinese, I think the read that they would have is that America is not in this for the long run. doesn't have the staying power to stick things up. If you fight, if you engage, whether in a physical conflict or war of attrition around ideas, the Americans are likely to blink first, to break first. And the tide of geostrategic influence around the world would seem to be one in which America is somewhat on the retreat. Of course, does that remain the case is the great foreign policy question around America now. Many Americans, polls showed, were keen on the withdrawal from Afghanistan. After the fact, I don't know if that's still going to be the case. It had been a very successful war, I think, for the Americans. Taliban had been defeated. It was no longer a base to launch terror operations against the West. Significant progress was being made, in particularly the urban centers, at bringing about a more, what you might say, westernized way of life, although very far from the kind of ideal that would be practiced in America. And there hadn't been combat casualties for a year. There were only 2,000 troops left. It wasn't the longest war. Both Vietnam and Korea are longer conflicts. So the loss, the defeat, was very much based on political decisions taken in Washington that brought about that. In a sense, I think many Americans might feel a disgrace of that. So the question is, does that prompt in a future administration a reversal of thinking, of policy about the rest of the world, particularly given the threat and ascendancy of China, which is one rare area of common ground that exists between the two, across the American political divide?
Now, Frans, when I was in the United States in late 2019, I had a few engagements with senior officials in the State Department and in other think tanks, and I often received a very polite welcome. But I got the distinct sense that South Africa just wasn't a priority for America in terms of its foreign policy outlook. What was your impression in 2021 after your visit?
Yeah, well, what you started to see on your trip, David, has been exacerbated subsequently. It wasn't always the case. I mean, South Africa was seen as an important part of the world, going back quite deep into the past. 5 or 6 years ago, I recall us booking out the ballroom at the Willard Hotel to speak on South Africa's future and its relationship with the United States. We had a large events at places like the Cato Institute. We had some very high-profile events attended by some top people. Now that's gone. The interest in South Africa is very much reduced. I mean, it's difficult to exaggerate the extent of that. The reason I think, and this is my impression, I'm not channeling anybody else here, is that Americans, the Washington establishment, had assumed, I think, in the early years of democracy that South Africa would naturally become a Western American ally on the continent. I think as time progressed, they had hoped that that would remain the case, and they saw great strategic advantage in that, both from a political perspective and from an economic perspective. And Americans have very generously invested in South Africa. Billions of dollars in just straight aid support reaches the country, and a vast amounts of foreign investment and retained fixed investment. Of late, and I think you were probably there in the early stages, that sense of optimism about South Africa and the assumption of its role in partnership with America has dissipated. Great disappointment now in the decisions South Africa takes. Its voting record at the United Nations would be one example of that. Disbelief at the policies of its government on the grounds that they are frankly unworkable. I mean, creating an economic recovery strategy around an expropriation strategy is just, it's not serious. The fiscal position too, the fact of the South African government running out of money and yet pursuing expansive spending policies completely at odds with economic reality. Again, it's not taken as a serious destination. I think some of the comments made by senior political leaders here, both in government and the ANC, around China, for example, of late, and we've commented on some of those in the CRA, has, in a sense, created the impression that South Africa is not a partner, certainly not a reliable partner, and it's not a serious place anymore. It's not the kind of place that you need to think or talk about if you sit in Washington, and that there are much better options for partnerships on the African continent. And I would say today, if you went to Washington to talk seriously about Nigeria or Kenya, you'd get far more interest than trying to do the same thing on South Africa. David.
Thanks very much, Frans. Let's hand over to you, our audience. Do you think that the United States is declining as a global superpower? Do leave your comments in the comment section below. Also, let us know your suggestions for how we can improve the channel. We're always looking to up our game. My name is David Ansara. This is the CRA. Until next time, take care.